However, what we're interested in at the moment is access to the hinge screw for the door, and of course there's a corresponding hinge screw at the top, visible in that plate. And I'll lift that arm up to disengage it, and I note that it does have a paper washer, top and bottom, to provide some controlled friction in that slot. Now that's quite unusual for this model. That's something I haven't really noticed before, which means that those paper washers were probably incredibly fragile and typically are long gone. I'll need to remove the lens and shutter assembly. So using my Beljan tool, which is sadly unavailable these days, I'll loosen the retaining ring, and pop the shutter to one side for servicing. And start disconnecting, removing the focus scale, the helical, and then we'll dig in deeper. So our coupling ring is for the, coupling lever for the rangefinder, held in by two tiny screws. We can lift that off. We have our focus scale ring, our outer helical and our inner helical, and I'm going to mark those so that I have them marked and I know where they go back for reassembly. So I'm checking to see that the inner and the outer helical are not sitting at quite the same level, so I'm going to mark the outer helical and the focus scale ring. So I know where they sit relative to each other. And then I will mark the inner helical and the outer helical at the point I have their front surfaces level, so that I know how to correctly locate them relative to each other. Our focus scale ring, that feels about level there. Actually, I'm checking the level of these parts. The inner helical is slightly higher than the outer. It may well be that it will not go down any lower than that. It's back in the housing as far as it will go. That's okay. As long as I'm aware of that, that's all good. I'll mark those alignment marks and need two at the top. There they are. Six screws hold the retainer in place. That screw head's a little bit damaged looking, probably the result of an earlier repair. take off our retainer plate, lift out the inner and outer helical together. They're quite dry, certainly need to be cleaned and re-lubricated. We have 4 screws, one at each corner, which hold the bellows to the back of the front standard, and that screw does not want to move. The plate that these screw into, which is in the bellows and behind here, that plate is steel. As a result of being steel, it's prone to corrosion. That screw is turning, but I don't know whether, oh, it's alright, it's intact. Those bellows can fall back out of the way now. I'm just bringing this screw forward so I can lift it out. It was turning, but it wasn't raising. It was actually because the bellows was falling away behind it. I thought the screw might have sheared off. Now that's all good. 4 screws here, one in each corner, that hold our our focus mount that the helical runs in. This brass focus mount is held to the back of the front standard with 4 screws. That's the last of our 4 screws that held the bellows to the back of the front standard. So there, our bellows are now loose in the body. They can drop back into the casting. That's not a problem. I need to remove the bellows intact, the struts rather, intact from the body, and there'll be 4 screws. There's one here in the top of the body, one here underneath all that corrosion and green mess, fold those bellows back out of the way, the struts rather. There are 2 screws in here in the film cassette chamber. To break these screws loose, I'm applying pressure in the direction you would to tighten the screw before I unscrew the screw. That often serves to break the screw free quite well. Now, I can't lift those out yet. I've got to take this plate off the top and lift out that shutter release shaft. So, this screw needs to come out. I'll use a pair of pliers to loosen that off, and then it can just be unscrewed with my fingers. There's a single small screw here. That plate will lift off. Our shutter release shaft will lift out, and our bellows struts mechanism can come out of the camera. I had to lift the arm off this rod here and take care not to lose this spring, the return spring for the shutter release that lives on there. Now, had this been a later example of the Retina II, there would have been a large cutout in the body at this point, sufficient that I could lift this whole mechanism up through that point. Because it's in fact one of the earliest examples, I have to disconnect the shaft that connects to this arm at the top of the camera before I can get to it, and that's a bit of a task. Well, it's not so much a task disconnecting it, it's more of a task reconnecting it, so I'll move on to that next. Okay, to get to this shaft, well, we have a post here that coupled to the spring, so we'll need to remove that screw there first. And we need to remove the adjustment gear at the top here. This these adjustment screws at the top here are in unusually good condition for one of these cameras, because quite frequently they're quite damaged. I think that'll lift off. Yes, it will. Now this screw here has to come out. That holds the shaft that this lever is sitting on. And that's one of the reasons these are a real trial to set back up afterwards, is because it's not keyed to that shaft. Make sure that arm is back against the body, where it can't cause any harm. That does not want to move. Alright, I'll apply a bit of solvent to that and have another go. Well, after sufficient waiting for the solvent to do its job and sufficient application of brute force, that screw came loose. It has a triangular lock washer underneath it, and with luck that arm will come loose from there now. Let's see if we can encourage it. It's stuck quite well, so I'll have to break that free. Alright, more tools. A bit more solvent. I have the arm at the front here where I can get hold of it, and I'll put a pair of smooth jawed pliers here. I'm going to grasp this boss at the top and see if I can rotate it. Yes, that's working. I'm working it backwards and forwards. I'd like to say it's coming very loose, but it's pretty reluctant. A bit more solvent and work that again. This is an awkward job, and the arrangement was changed in later examples of this model. There we go, it's free. So that comes off the top. And the arm should push out into the body. It really doesn't want to come down far enough. Let's see if we can work that a bit. Might have to lift the rangefinder off. It's quite stiff. Yes, there's the rangefinder. Lift it off. And you can see we've just got a small hole here where the arm runs through the body. And if I tip that sideways, I can probably just about lift that out past the bellows. If I stretch the bellows fully out, that'll probably provide me enough room to lift that through and out. It did. Alright, so we're getting right down to it now. This part at the end of the body, normally I want to remove this, so I've got to unhook that spring, which releases that spring. Take out this screw, which is a post. Oh, that doesn't want to go. But I do want it out. Where is that? Oh, well, I can't see it. Alright, it's coming loose. You can lift that off. And the rewind shaft here complete, held with 2 screws to the top of the body. You can lift that out. So the body is now empty. At this stage, quite often that's pretty much as far as you need to go. One of the things I do check very carefully at this point is to make sure that the bellows are well glued, that there's no sign that they are coming away from the casting at the back there. With these earlier cameras in particular, if there's been any corrosion in there, it's not uncommon for the adhesive to let go on the back of the bellows, and only in very rare occasions do the bellows all come loose all at once, but it's not at all uncommon for them to come away perhaps at the top edge or one of the side edges, and if they do come away, they're prone to light leaks. Sometimes it'll only be in certain situations or light coming in from a certain direction that causes you grief, but anyway, it's certainly something that's well worth being very, very careful. If the bellows are coming loose, the best policy is to remove them completely, clean away all the corrosion and old adhesive, and then put them back in, re-gluing them back in. I have found from experience, in order to get the bellows loose, if they do need to be taken out, acetone is the best solvent, and typically I would just apply it on a cotton bud or a Q-tip along the edge I'm currently working on, inside and out, and then carefully lifting away the leather, prying it away so that the bellows are loose, and I'd work around all 4 sides of the bellows until it was loose. And you've got to be quite patient, and you don't want to be throwing around too much acetone and to avoid damaging the bellows themselves. In this case, these bellows appear to be quite sound. I'll have a look at the rest of it here. One of the things I'd want to check is that the sprocket shaft here rotates smoothly. There's no sign of problems with this particular one. If it's stiff, then that would point to the grease being very dry, or perhaps dust or grit in there. And to remove this shaft, you have two screws, here and here. There's usually a washer in here, a spacer. I see this camera doesn't appear to have a spacer in that position. Often there's a washer at this position. Those two screws are loosened up. You can pull that shaft right through. At the base of the camera, often there is a plug. At this point, it's just a piece of card or something of a similar nature, and that can be pried out, and you can push the shaft through or just pull it through. And all you'll need to do is clean the shaft, make sure it's clean, put a little dot of grease on there, pop the thing back together again. Just make sure you've got this piece in the correct way up. The teeth are down, not up against the body casting. So this all needs to be cleaned now, and as I clean it, reassemble it. The rangefinder, of course, is going to be fun, as I mentioned, because all adjustment has effectively been lost because the arm had to be removed completely from the rangefinder. On the later examples, there's a bigger hole in the body at this point, and that allows you to lift the rangefinder complete with its arm out of the body in one piece, and that avoids you having to disassemble all that stuff. So, cleaning and reassembly. First thing to do here before I clean and go any further, I think, is to check that the tripod socket screws are all tight. Commonly one or more of them will be loose. If they were loose, I would probably remove the tripod socket completely, clean it and put it back. Those screws are quite tight, there's not a problem there. I'll leave that all in place. There's nothing under there that you need to remove, apart from if the socket was loose and you wanted to clean it to make sure there was no dust or rubbish underneath it. And there we have it. The camera is stripped down and needs to be serviced now, cleaned up and lubricated appropriately and put back together. I might take out that shaft, it's just a little bit dry. I can find the right screwdriver. Be careful with these grub screws, they're very, very short, very easily lost. I'll just loosen those up, see if the shaft will lift. Take that grub screw out, put it to one side. Take the other one out and put that to one side. Those screws are extremely easy to lose, and it's a major bother and a nuisance if you do. I'll just lift this screw out, that's stopping me getting where I need to be. That's just a retainer post where one of the springs hooks up, I think. Right, lift the shaft out. There's the plain roller from the bottom. There's our sprocket at the top. As I say, sometimes there's a washer here between that sprocket and the top. There's not in this case. I'm pleased to have those out. They do feel, it does feel a little bit like that grease is a bit sticky and nasty. I'll be pleased to have that cleaned up. And So I'll clean these components up and then you can come back and watch me put it back together.